What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Friday, September 27th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. And this is the last MLB live stream for this season. I think season wraps up on Sunday, I think. So won't have any more MLB ones. Still have the NFL show on Sunday. And I will be doing basketball during the week once that starts up. But last MLB one for the season. Thank you guys for checking it out. Thanks for watching this show over the last month or so since I started doing it. I've enjoyed doing it. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it as well. But we have a 12-game slate tonight. Some weather concerns, but doesn't look too bad. I kind of thought it was going to look worse today with the hurricane and all of that. I know it's rained basically nonstop in Maryland for, I think, a week, but doesn't seem too bad weather-wise for the main slate. We do need to keep an eye on the Houston and Cleveland game, also potentially the Yankees game, but that one I think looks okay. So Houston and Cleveland right now at least looks like the one that has the biggest concerns. It seems like the rain should be in the early part of the game, so hopefully they just delay and play it or just play through rain, either one. But we do need to keep an eye on that one. Otherwise, everything, at least right now, looks pretty okay. So we have 12 games to talk about. Still big tournaments to play. $50K to first in the $11 on DraftKings, $100K to first in the $100. So both of those, relatively large field tournaments tonight. 3K entries in the $100, $111, like 16,000, I think, in the $11. So would be nice to take down one or both of those heading into college football and NFL weekend. So going to go through, as usual, talking position by position, stack by stack, seeing what I'd be getting to if the slate started right now. As always, if you have questions about anything that you don't see me getting to, feel free to ask. I may or may not have a reason specifically that I'm not getting to them. Usually it's just going to be, if you have lineups you like with that guy, then go for it. But still feel free to ask. Also, keep in mind that this time of year, there is just some added variance with pitchers being pulled early that you don't necessarily expect, with pinch hitters or defensive substitutions that you don't necessarily expect, although that isn't as much of an issue these days since you don't have 40-man rosters anymore. But, we've seen it a couple days ago. You had Bowden Francis just pulled at 71 pitches because he hasn't been starting all year, and they just decided that was enough. Yesterday, not on the main slate, but you had Corbin Burns pulled at 69 pitches because the Orioles said, okay, we've seen enough, time to get ready for the wild card series. So you do just kind of have random stuff like that happening. It can or does help if you have a pitcher on a team that is playing for something, but obviously the deeper into the season you get, the fewer of those teams that there are. There's not many teams left that are truly playing for anything. The Orioles still, I think, haven't officially locked up home field in the wild card round, but they have it. The Twins haven't been eliminated, but they're not making the playoffs. So you kind of have situations like that. The Yankees wrapped up the division yesterday, so they don't have anything to play for, but or at least anything really significant to play for. But just keep in mind, there is just kind of increased volatility for you to just kind of get screwed on stuff. It is what it is. For the most part, I think that it's kind of just, unavoidable. You just have to kind of hope to not get lucky. Spots that are, more obvious are just going to be projected that way. So anyway, getting into the pitching here, you can see, if you've been looking at the screen while I was talking, that I am pretty flat on exposures overall today, which is usually what happens on a 12-game slate. You just end up with more options to get to. It flattens out exposures. You have a lot of players that have a similar range of outcomes. But Brian Wu here, 38% of my lineups, 15%, 14 to 15% for the field. And at 8,400, I think that looks pretty good going up against the A's. At this point in the season, you kind of know what you're getting with Oakland. This is a team that does have strikeouts in their lineup. They do also have guys that can hit for power. The game is in Seattle, so good park for strikeouts, good park for preventing runs. Just looks like a pretty good spot for Wu here. I like getting to him at only 8,400, especially because he's not really getting that much ownership, at least right now. Carlos Rodon, 29% ownership. I'm getting to 32%. Very good matchup for him going up against the Pirates. This is a spot where I guess if I had to sort of predict which pitchers were going to get screwed on, Rodon would sort of be towards the top of the list since the Yankees did just clinch. Maybe they just give him 5 innings, get him out of there healthy. But, I don't know. Maybe they don't. 9,300, just a good price tag. pretty much regardless, assuming that he's not giving you like 3 innings or anything like that. Good matchup, good strikeout stuff. Obviously not the same sort of pitcher that he was a couple of years ago, but 26.5% strikeout percentage. So we saw that number come up as the season went on, as we expected. 4.05 xFIP, and the Pirates' active roster against left-handed pitching since the start of last season ranks in the top 10 in strikeout percentage. They have a 96 WRC plus. So he looks good, but not getting too carried away there either. Just pretty much right around the field. Reed Detmers, I am quite a bit over the field on, and this is a scary strikeout matchup against Texas. It's a tough team to strike out, but Detmers has good stuff. He's cheap at 6,800, and right now he's only projected for around 10% ownership. Maybe that number ends up coming in higher. I've said it before on these shows that a lot of times when you get, especially a value pitcher that is just showing up in a lot of my lineups that isn't projected to be popular, the actual answer is just that they're going to be more popular than projected. So maybe he comes in at 15 to 20% owned, but the upside here is nice. You do have a watered down Texas lineup as well with Corey Seager being injured. So still not a ton of strikeouts here. We don't have their actual lineup yet, but Seager being out obviously weakens the lineup. The bottom of the order, probably something like Foscue, Tavares, Matt Duffy, certainly not the best major league hitters. And Detmers has good stuff. He was sent down in the middle of the season, demoted to AAA for, I don't really know the reasons. Like, he hadn't been pitching great, but overall this year, 26% strikeout percentage, 4.04 xFIP, clearly not a AAA pitcher or even a below average major league pitcher, especially from a strikeout standpoint. So at that price tag, I do like him, even if that ownership does come up a little bit. I just don't think that he's really priced for the upside that he gives you, even in a relatively difficult matchup against Texas. Jacob deGrom, I'm even with the field on him. $8,400 price tag, very good strikeout matchup against the Angels. We don't have this lineup yet, but we know that this is a team that's dealt with some injuries. They are not at full strength, and with it being the end of the season, you could just get even worse lineups than usual once that is released. DeGrom missed most of the year, but he is back. 31% strikeout percentage through his limited starts so far this year. Throwing the ball well, obviously one of the best pitchers of all time when he is healthy. In a good matchup at a reasonable price tag. In his most recent start, he threw 58 pitches, threw 61 the start before that, 3 2/3 and 3 innings in those 2 starts. So the concern is, how deep into the game does he go? But, especially with nothing to play for. But assuming he goes like 4-ish innings, still can certainly give you 4 to 5 innings, can certainly give you a good enough score at 8,400 in this spot, especially when you don't have a ton of other pitchers that project well. So I think you could make the case for getting less DeGrom just from a ceiling standpoint, where if 27% of the field is going to roster somebody that is on a pitch count, most likely, you could just say, well, even if he pitches well, let's say he gets 18 points, I can make up for that elsewhere. But the flip side of that is at 8,400, even if he does just give me 16, 17 points, chances are that's good enough, and I can just move on and, find high upside hitters and all of that, because it is a very good spot for him. He is still a very good pitcher. Frankie Montas getting 16% ownership. I'm at 20%, $7K price tag. I don't expect him to work all that deep into this game, and it's not a very good very good matchup against the Mets, but I do like the price tag here at 7K. Threw 68 pitches last time out. I assume he'll throw a little bit more than that here, probably give you around 5 innings or so, hopefully. So again, probably not giving you 100 pitches or anything like that, but on this slate, I think that still looks fine. Same thing for Nick Pivetta, basically at 7,900. He's on a team that has nothing to play for, but he's not a young pitching prospect or anything like that on an innings limit. He has good strikeout stuff. He has a good strikeout matchup against Tampa Bay. So I like getting to him at 7,900. Pablo Lopez, a little over the field. Tough matchup against the O's at 8,800. The Orioles, have gotten healthy again. So this isn't the same anemic lineup that you were seeing not that long ago. But this is technically a must-win game for Minnesota, even if they do win, they still probably aren't making the playoffs. So he is showing up for me a bit. I think at low ownership, he makes some sense, even though the matchup is scary. Taj Bradley, good strikeout matchup, also a dangerous matchup. The Red Sox, even without Rafael Devers, still do have quality bats in their lineup. But they do also strike out quite a bit. Bradley has good strikeout stuff, comes into this start with a 26.5% strikeout percentage, 3.66 xFIP. So I think the upside is there, but it is also a scary matchup. 8,300 is a reasonable price tag. Not getting too much Sean Manaea here. That, along with Max Fried, stands out as the 2 pitchers I'm not getting a lot of. Manaea has been getting strikeouts at a high rate lately. He made some adjustments in his delivery / pitch mix, and it has led to increased strikeouts. So there is a chance that I'm just still under projecting him a little bit. But 8,700, I'm just getting to some of these other guys. He does get a park downgrade going into Milwaukee, so that hurts a little bit. But I wouldn't fault anybody for playing Manaea. If you told me you wanted to go there instead of like DeGrom, that's fine. But I prefer DeGrom, at least right now. And I'm not really getting too much Manaea. Same thing for Fried going up against Kansas City. Tough strikeout matchup. Not a great strikeout pitcher. He's relatively expensive at 9,400, and he's getting ownership. It's kind of been the case for me all year, but I typically just don't get to Max Fried all that much when he's north of 9K because he is a very good real life pitcher. He's good at preventing runs. That doesn't necessarily strike out or translate to a lot of strikeouts, a lot of DFS points. 23% strikeout percentage this year, 3.35 xFIP. To put that in context with, strikeout being king in DFS, Fried has a lower strikeout percentage than DeGrom, Pivetta, Rodon, Bradley, Detmers, Manaea, Lopez. Not a great strikeout pitcher. So you get upside elsewhere for cheaper. And it would be one thing if Fried just weren't getting ownership, but he is. So I end up looking somewhere else. We do have, it's put the fork down, mentioned it in chat. Wind, I think, blowing in Atlanta as well. But, still doesn't necessarily translate to a ton of fantasy points, even if it translates to run prevention. Still wouldn't fault anyone for playing Fried. He is good. But right now, at least, I'm not getting too much Manaea or Fried. I am getting to a bit more of the other guys priced around them. Jose Barrios getting 10% ownership. I'm not really getting there. Pretty good matchup against Miami. Just tough to pay 9K for a pitcher that has struck out 19.5% of the hitters he's faced this year when he's getting some ownership. So that kind of pushes him down a little bit for me as well. Moving over to the stacks that I'm getting to, Boston at the top in Fenway against Taj Bradley. Bradley is a solid pitcher overall, but he does give up some power. 1.3 home runs allowed per 9 innings so far this season. The Red Sox do still have power in their lineup as well, even without Rafael Devers. So I like that. They're in a park that plays up power, park downgrade for Taj Bradley. Jarren Duran, Trevor Story, Tristan Casas, all in there at the top of the order. That looks pretty good. Connor Wong gives you a value catcher hitting cleanup. Again, not the best hitter, but for a catcher batting cleanup in this lineup, that's still pretty appealing. Yoshida can hit. Grissom gives you a value second base option. Abreu looks pretty good as well. So still talent in this lineup, even without being at full strength. No Devers, no O'Neill. Still getting to them. Tampa Bay on the other side of that game, nice park upgrade for them. Nick Pivetta, kind of similar to Taj Bradley. Good strikeout pitcher, also gives up power. When you make contact against Pivetta, you typically make quality contact, hit the ball hard. 1.8 home runs allowed per 9 innings for him this year. 28.5% strikeout percentage, 3.62 xFIP. More likely than not, he just kind of racks up strikeouts here, but it is a good park for home runs. Tampa Bay does have a lot of home run upside here in this park. So I like getting to them. Minnesota, the Dodgers, Baltimore, San Diego, all showing up pretty similarly. Minnesota going up against Baltimore, Baltimore against Minnesota, Dodgers in cores where obviously everything looks good there if you can afford them. Shohei Ohtani is $8,000 on this slate, which is the highest price tag I can ever remember seeing on DraftKings. San Diego looks fine as well. So pretty spread out stacking wise, which isn't really surprising given the slate and given that outside of Coors Field, most of these teams look pretty similar. Ted said, I usually agree with Adam, but I'm very surprised at his pitching exposure tonight. I don't know what specifically, but the only thing that I'm kind of surprised at is DeGrom, just because of the chance that he's still more limited than I would like. But I don't have any issues with any of the other pitching that I'm getting to. Wino Roop, he's been getting 5+ innings pitched. K's not bad, 42 across 46 innings pitched. Cardinals super low team total and good pitcher spark. I don't know, just not showing up for me. 7,700. Yeah, I mean, he's not getting any ownership. He just doesn't project that well for me. Like, I haven't projected for 12 to 13 DraftKings points at 7,700. I guess I could just move this over here. I don't know why it keeps sliding over there, but you can compare him to the guys that I am getting to. Pavetta's projected several points higher at $200 more. Montas is projected higher for $700 less. So if I were to get there, it would simply be ownership. But with a 12-game slate, you can find low enough hitters that I'm just still not getting there anyway. Ted said mostly DeGrom, and I have a lot of Manaea. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think you could make the case for DeGrom having a limited ceiling here just because of how deep into the game he's going to go, but he's still likely to just rack up strikeouts here, get you your 18 points or so, and then get out of the game. I'm not as concerned about like raw ceiling with pitchers because generally you can make up those points with bats anyway. Like even if some pitcher on this slate goes for 26 and DeGrom goes for 18, I can overcome that with bats most likely. So I do think there's a case for maybe just not getting to as much DeGrom, especially because he's popular. But at the same time, I think that I'll still probably have a decent amount just because the matchup's good. And also the salary does factor in the pitch count to some extent. Like in no world is a stretched out, non-limited Jacob DeGrom 8,400 against the Angels. He'd be $2,000 more expensive. So that's another thing you have to keep in mind too, is just the salary on DeGrom. Manaea, yeah, I think Manaea is fine. I don't love the matchup against Milwaukee, but if you buy into his changes recently, which I do at least to some extent, he is a better pitcher than he has been for most of the season. The strikeout stuff is there. It's just, I think, a combination of him being relatively expensive compared to some other guys that I'm getting to, and then also matchup, park, me just kind of preferring some other guys, also some of them being at lower ownership. So stacks pretty spread out. That should lead to pretty spread out hitters. Before I get into hitter exposures, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. Also, sign up at Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below. All of my NFL content is there. I have videos there talking about my process, how I approach DFS, different things I think about, different things that I do using publicly available tools. Brick75 has walked through a lot of the things that he thinks about, flaws in some of the publicly available stuff, how to build your own projections, build your own ownership projections. Utica has walked through his lineup building process as well, and I believe is planning on having an NFL video coming out shortly. Nerdy Tenor has a bunch of videos up using toy games that basically break down simpler versions of DFS, best ball, underdog battle royale concepts, show you how to approach them, how to exploit them, and then you can apply those skills and concepts to your process going forward. So a bunch of instructional strategy type videos up over there in addition to my content. If the price point doesn't make sense for you right now, you can get my content using the NFL Dub Club link in the description below as well. Any thoughts on Aller? No, other than he's not very good at pitching. Didn't show up for me. Tough matchup, tough strikeout matchup, tough park. I don't really see it. Offensively, Connor Wong showing up 20% of the time. That's not surprising at all. 5% projected ownership, batting cleanup in a boom or bust spot against Bradley. Again, he's not super likely to succeed because Bradley is a good pitcher overall, good strikeout pitcher, but there is home run upside in this park. When Boston does well, it's just likely that it's very conducive to winning tournaments as opposed to teams in bigger ballparks where even if they do well, even if they score a lot of runs, it's likely to be via singles and doubles, likely to be home runs, extra base hits. For the Red Sox, Wong's affordable. He's batting cleanup. So I'm getting a lot of him. Christian Vasquez, 2,300, batting eighth. Not a great hitter or anything like that. Not a great park for home runs, but still a pretty high implied run total for the Twins. He's cheap. They have a decent matchup here going up against Cade Povich. Orioles bullpen is certainly not the best, although it is getting healthier with Jacob Webb and Danny Coulomb back. So just punting catcher with Vasquez makes sense, especially if you're stacking the Twins. Once again, for the millionth time, I'm getting to Shea Langoliers at basically no ownership. I don't like the matchup. He's going up against my highest owned pitcher in Brian Wu, but in lineups that I don't have Wu, may as well be getting to some Langoliers just because he has a ton of power, even though this is a park that limits power. Wu has also only allowed a 100 expected ISO to righties. So like I said, bad matchup, but just kind of betting on catcher talent is perfectly fine. Logan Driscoll, I have absolutely no idea who he is, but he's batting ninth at 2,500 for Tampa Bay. He's in Tampa stacks, and that's it. Victor Caratini showing up a little bit for me, 2,700, right? Even with the field. Batting fifth. This is the game that has weather concerns, so we do need to keep an eye on that. But going up against Joey Cantillo, who has been solid so far in the major leagues, 26% strikeout percentage, 3.6 xFIP, but you just have a cheap catcher on a team with a relatively high implied run total. decent implied run total. It's lower than I expected it to be, but good price, good offense, all of that. So pretty spread out at catcher, mostly going to be with stacks. But Connor Wong, the one that really stands out here as far as a contrarian play that I'm getting to. And it goes hand in hand with getting to a lot of Boston here against Bradley. First base, Carlos Santana, going back to the Twins. Again, I was stacking them a good amount, so that's not too surprising. Switch hitter, so he'll be hitting from the right side, batting cleanup against Povich, but will obviously have the platoon advantage elsewhere as well. Luis Arraez, 10% of my lineups, about 3% for the field. So a bit over the field there. Not confirmed yet. We don't have that San Diego lineup, but pretty high implied run total. Not the most exciting guy to get to because he doesn't give you a lot of power, but where you are stacking San Diego, he is perfectly fine to go to at first base, assuming that he's in the lineup. Then, just get to the higher upside guys elsewhere. He offers some salary relief. You can get to Tatis, you get to Machado around him. Jackson Merrill's only 4,300. Bogarts is sub 4K, going up against a decent pitcher in Merrill Kelly. But I like the upside that San Diego as a whole offers. So saving some salary with still a good hitter, even though he doesn't have a ton of power, in Arraez is perfectly fine. Yandy Diaz not getting any ownership here. If you're stacking Tampa Bay, by all means, go to Diaz. Right-handed power in Fenway Park against a pitcher that does give up home runs in Pivetta. I like that at basically no ownership. Zach DeZenzo, 4% ownership. Again, just a cheap bat in the Houston lineup. If you're getting to the Astros, save some salary there. Not somebody that I'd want to be using a ton as a one-off here. The spot, like I said, isn't great, but he is really cheap. Tyler Soderstrom has the platoon advantage against Wu, who does give up a little bit more power to lefties. 150 expected ISO in that split compared to 100 to righties, but still not a good overall matchup. Certainly not a good park, but Soderstrom is inexpensive at 3,200. I'm getting to 8% Ohtani right now at first base. Hopefully have some more in the outfield. Really tricky spot given that he is $8,000, but also just clearly the best hitting play on the slate. He's projected for 25 to 30% ownership. So that mostly tells me that it's not that difficult to get him into lineups if you want to. We do have enough pitching in that like $7,000 to $8,500 range. There's going to be plenty of value bets elsewhere because of it being a 12-game slate as well. So if you can get to Ohtani, by all means, he looks absolutely fantastic as always. I'm getting to Pete Alonso at basically no ownership. I guess I should switch this over to my projected ownership. So Ohtani comes down a little bit in my ownership, but still north of 20%. Getting to a little bit of Pete Alonso here goes without saying that if you get to low own Pete Alonso, that's always nice. He does get a bit of a park upgrade in Milwaukee as well. As far as popular first base options, Ohtani getting the most. I'm not getting to Vlad here going up against Miami. The Blue Jays are getting some ownership. I think they look pretty good in this park, but there's just so many other teams that have a similar range of outcomes. They're getting squeezed out a little bit for me, which is perfectly fine. But if you wanted to play the Blue Jays, also clearly in a pretty good spot here, going up against Adam Oller. Only a 106 expected ISO to righties for him this year. 276 to lefties, 227 actual ISO to lefties. So he has had very significant issues with opposite-handed hitters. He's been better at limiting power to righties. All of that is in a small sample, though. And obviously, I don't care what he's done against the average right-handed hitter when you're talking about Vladimir Guerrero. So if you're going to the Blue Jays, you should still clearly be going to Vladimir Guerrero. I'm not getting to Caratini at first base. That's not really surprising. Obviously, he's somebody that you would just rather roster at catcher where there is less opportunity cost. Kyle Manzardo, right around the field with him. So Guerrero and sort of Ohtani, the fades for me at first base. But I expect that I will just have more Ohtani in the outfield. That 8% mark is just what I had at first base. Overall, I have 16% Ohtani, so I am a little below the field, but not as drastic as it looks like if you just look at the first base numbers. Brandon Lau showing up a lot at second base. That doesn't surprise me at all, given that I'm getting to Tampa Bay, and he's one of the best hitters on Tampa Bay. Getting to a bit of Zach Geloff. So even though I'm getting to Wu, I am also getting to the Oakland side, just getting the decent bats from Oakland at very little ownership. You do get some stolen base upside with Geloff as well. Vaughn Grissom, I like, especially if you're going to Boston stacks, gives you some upside, but mostly he's just really, really cheap at a relatively weak position. Second base is a position that I really don't mind punting. The opportunity cost isn't as high as it is at positions like first base or the outfield. So I like getting some salary relief there. And then in this case, he correlates with my highest owned stack as well. Jose Altuve, Semien, Cronenworth, Ketel Marte, all showing up in similar amounts. These are all just guys that are getting, 5% ownership, give or take. I'm getting around there as well. I can get a little bit over the field on them. The field is getting to Kike Hernandez, which I am not right now, at least at second base. They're getting to Semien. I'm around the field there. Leo Jimenez, they're getting around 8%. So it looks like I'm pretty much just fading Toronto, at least right now. But nobody getting double-digit ownership right now at second base, just a weak position overall. But not really surprised with who I'm getting to for the most part, Geloff being the exception. I really would prefer to not be getting to the Oakland that I'm getting to. They are a high upside offense, but they're in a shitty park. They're in a shitty matchup. So if they were to disappear, I wouldn't be upset. But also you can see that they're not really a huge part of my night. Like, assuming Oakland gets shut down here, that's still a net positive for me. I have a lot of Brian Wu. I don't have that much Oakland. Third base, normally I would assume that I'm getting to Devers, but obviously that's not going to be the case here. Junior Caminero, I like this one a lot. 5% ownership, 4,200, reasonable price tag, nice park upgrade for one of the best hitting prospects in baseball. So I like getting to him. Again, just getting to a lot of this game in Fenway. It's a game that has a similar total to a lot of other games on the slate, but because of the park, the range of outcomes is just a little bit more favorable, skewed towards home runs and productive run scoring, and that applies obviously to Caminero hitting third. Max Muncy getting 18% ownership. I'm at 12%. Whatever you can get to is going to look good. He's in Coors Field. He's 5,600. He's a good hitter. Should be in a good spot in the order. Jordan Westberg, I am 2 to 3x the field against Lopez at third base. Wasn't really getting much, at least that I noticed, at second base, which is a little surprising since that is a weaker position, but very good hitter, batting second. Not a good matchup, but this is one of those weird slates where like there's not a lot of good pitchers with great matchups, but there's also not a lot of good offenses with good matchups. So it just ends up kind of being a slate where a lot of guys, their median projection ends up being pretty mediocre, but you have to keep the range of outcomes in mind. And when you get a hitter as talented as Westberg, even against somebody like Lopez, he does still have a very high ceiling, even though Lopez has struck out 28% of hitters this year, only a 164 expected ISO. Manny Machado, same kind of thing against Merrill Kelly. Kelly's a solid pitcher. Machado's also a really good hitter, and he's not getting much ownership. Mark Vientos, not getting a ton of ownership here, only getting about 2%, so I like that. The Dodgers lineup just came out, apparently. Thank you for that. Trying to refresh now to see how that looks. Ohtani leading off, Betts, Gavin Lux hitting third, Hernandez, Tommy Edman, Kike hitting sixth, Andy Pajes, Chris Taylor, Austin Barnes. So no Will Smith in the lineup. No Max Muncy, who I was just talking about, in the lineup. So that does make the Dodgers a little bit cheaper. Gavin Lux hitting third at 4,800, Edmonds hitting fifth at 5K, Kike hitting sixth at 4K. So they do get a little bit cheaper with no Muncy. Obviously, they do also get a little bit weaker. The matchup against Quantrill is fine in Coors Field, but Quantrill is not a total gas can either. Still overall, clearly the best spot on the slate, though. You just have to figure out how to work around ownership. Max Muncy, obviously not in the lineup, so that's going to move elsewhere, but he was projected for a lot of ownership. Addison Barger, another Blue Jay that is very fairly priced, getting 12% ownership, third base and outfield eligible, hitting sixth. Looks good, just not getting to him because I'm not really getting to the Blue Jays too much. Royce Lewis, another one where if you can get there, great. I like the matchup against Povich. Although Povich isn't always my favorite guy to target, like that type of pitcher, just because he does have good stuff. And when he's throwing strikes, working ahead in counts, he can be pretty difficult to hit. His main issue is that he struggles to throw strikes. But the caveat to that, too, is struggling to throw strikes doesn't always mean that you're just walking everybody and they're only getting 2 fantasy points. You can get the game where he's wild within the strike zone, just doesn't have good command of his pitches, and then can get hit very, very hard, especially if he's working behind in counts in that situation. So there is that to keep in mind. Lewis does look good if you can find the salary. Tommy Edman getting a lot of ownership at shortstop, and he should be. He's batting fifth, like I said. Just looks good here. I'm getting to 8% at shortstop, maybe have a little bit more in the outfield. Mostly, I'm just not getting to the Dodgers right now because of ownership. It's a 12-game slate. There's a million other options that you can get to. Even though they are the most likely team to succeed, obviously, you would still bet the field against them at even money. So I'm just kind of spreading out exposure to a lot of other teams, but still getting to them some, probably mostly as mini stacks. I didn't actually check that earlier, but yeah, not getting a lot of, or any, 5-man Dodger stacks. Using them more often as 2-mans and 3-mans. That's not really surprising to me. Have some 4-mans in there too. But basically the idea is just that for each additional Dodger that you put into a stack, you're taking on a lot of ownership, and it's making it that much more difficult to be different than the field when not only are those players popular individually, but a high percentage of the lineups that have, for example, Tommy Edman are also going to have Shohei Ohtani. You're also going to have, Mookie Betts, whoever. So that is why I'm getting more mini stacks than full stacks. Same goes here for Rojas, who was not in the lineup anyway. Carlos Correa, good matchup if you can get to him. For me, I'm getting to Trevor Story a lot, batting second at 4K in Fenway. I like that. I'm getting to Lindor. Very high upside shortstop at 5,600, just not getting a lot of ownership. Same here for Gunnar. So I am paying up a bit at shortstop to be contrarian. Gunnar only projected for 3% ownership. Tough matchup, but he's still Gunnar Henderson. So I like that. I like getting the Bogarts at low ownership. So I like how I'm handling shortstop from an upside standpoint, from a contrarian standpoint, even though clearly these guys aren't super likely to work out when you have, Trevor Story against Bradley. You have Gunnar against Lopez. You have Lindor against Montas. Montas, I think, the weakest of those three pitchers, but still not bad. In the outfield, getting to a little bit more Ohtani, as I mentioned. Johnny DeLuca is pretty gross, but he's 3,300, batting fifth. I would expect and hope that this is mostly Tampa Bay stacks. I don't really want, all 7 of my Johnny DeLuca lineups are in Tampa stacks. So that does make sense. If you're stacking Tampa, get the cheap guy batting fifth. If you're not stacking Tampa, I don't really want a lot of Johnny DeLuca one-offs. Manny Margot does have considerable pinch hit risk here going up against Povich, but he is also only 2,600 leading off. So I think he's fine, but there is a pretty good chance he ends up getting pinch hit for later. I like Jarren Duran a lot, with or without Boston stacks. Obviously I like him in Boston stacks, but he's different than Johnny DeLuca, where even if you're not stacking Boston, if you just have a lineup that needs a low-owned guy and you have salary in the outfield, Jarren Duran is great. Like, gives you stolen base upside, gives you power upside, just a very high upside play at low ownership. Same really for Brandon Nimmo here. Park upgrade from a left-handed power standpoint. 4,500 is a reasonable price tag. Montas is good, but not great. Teoscar, I managed to get around the field. I'm over the field on Tatis, on Carroll, on Buxton. So once again, just excluding DeLuca and Margot, very much like the way I'm handling the outfield as far as getting to very good high upside hitters at low ownership, even if they are in tough matchups and relatively unlikely to succeed. There's just so much variance, so much volatility in baseball that you can maximize and capitalize on that by just playing really talented hitters at low ownership, hoping the pitcher has a bad day or doesn't have a bad day and the hitter just does what he's very good at doing. The field, like I said, getting to a lot of Ohtani, getting to a lot of Betts, getting to a lot of Edman, just not really getting to those guys right now. And again, it's just a function of ownership. I think you can make good lineups that have the Dodgers. It just, for me at least, was more difficult than making good lineups that don't, for kind of a lack of a better way of saying it. But if you go to the Dodgers, then, start mixing in some lower owned pitchers. The pitchers that people have asked about in chat that I've said that I am not getting to and don't really have interest in, they become more appealing if you're trying to find ways to stack the Dodgers a lot. So, again, you can make plus EV lineups with pretty much any player within reason. But, the approach I'm taking is to just kind of spread out offensively, not get quite as much of the Dodgers as the field, and then get to the pitchers that I prefer. So yeah, that's kind of how I'm handling stacks, how I'm handling the outfield. Am I getting to any Kasperius at 4K? No, but I didn't project him because I don't really know how to project him. Like, Ryan Brazier is opening, it looks like. Gonsolin, there was talk, would be used today. He's still listed right now, at least, as the probable pitcher on DraftKings, but I haven't seen anything about him being activated. So I am not getting to him right now. There is a chance when I redo everything, now that we actually have a Dodgers lineup, that I take a shot on him, but I don't know that he's even guaranteed to pitch is the problem. When I go to the long relief guys, I really like it being a situation where I know that they're using an opener and then following him with this one guy. If that's been reported, I just haven't seen it, so let me know. But assuming that it hasn't, and we're just kind of guessing they called him off the pitch today, I could see it, but I just don't really think you need it all that much on this slate. There's enough mid-range pitching that looks good or good enough that I don't really want to roll the dice on guys that I'm not positive are pitching. And if they do pitch, exactly how much. You see it a lot of times too, where it's like you'll get Brazier for an inning, then you'll get someone else for an inning or two, and then you'll get that long guy for like 2 innings, and it just ends up sucking. So that would be my concern there. But if there was a report that I missed, which is entirely possible, then he'd be at least somewhat interesting. But overall, I don't really think that I need him. So pretty interesting slate, I think. I think there's a lot of different ways you can go. Obviously, like I said, you can get to the Dodgers. I'm not telling anyone not to. It's not really the approach I'm taking, at least in 5-man stacks. My 5-mans, San Diego, Tampa Bay. God, I hate that I'm getting to Oakland, but I like that I'm getting to San Diego. I like that I'm getting to Tampa Bay. Oakland's basically the same kind of thing where like they have power in their lineup and you're just hoping for randomness to break in your way. The thing that I don't like is the park. Like, even if they get to Brian Wu, it's just so much more likely that they're hitting doubles than home runs, as opposed to, Tampa Bay and Boston, for example. So there is that, but, not a ton of great hitters parks on this slate either, I guess. So I'm okay with Oakland. I wouldn't mind if they disappeared, but I'm happy with San Diego, happy with Tampa, Minnesota, Houston. They all look fine. Not getting a lot of 5-man Boston stacks either. Have a few 4-mans, but it's a lot of Boston mini stacks, which does, I think, make sense given like the value that Wong offers. Duran as a high upside one-off. So, and also from a matchup standpoint, where you are going against a good pitcher in Bradley, but he also just, gives up home runs here and there by grabbing 1 or 2 Red Sox or even 1 or 2 Rays on the other side in a similar matchup with Pivetta. You can kind of capitalize on their weakness without having to get the full blow-up game from them. So I think that is an interesting approach, but overall, pretty interesting slate. Looking forward to playing it, hopefully winning 100K and then blowing it all on NFL this weekend. But thank you guys for checking out the show. If there's any last minute questions, feel free to throw them in chat. I missed Put the Fork Down said Miami stack, right-handed power. I don't have it, but I don't hate it here. It is a nice park upgrade for them. Barrios is not a great pitcher anymore. 182 expected ISO to left-handed hitters this year. 184 expected ISO to right-handed hitters, so pretty even splits there. I don't hate it. Like I said, I don't really have it, but it makes sense. You're getting the park upgrade. It's not worse than Oakland. Like, if you replaced my Oakland with Miami, I would be perfectly happy. Rockies question. Oh, thoughts on the Rockies? 3rd highest team total, probably low ownership due to price tags and being an underdog. Do you like them as a contrarian stack? I'll throw them basically the same way that I just said about Miami. Like, I'm not really getting to them, but they are in a good park. They're not going to get a lot of ownership. So, like, that's working for them. If they started showing up the same way that the A's are for me, I wouldn't be upset at all. I do think the salaries are probably the issue for me, assuming that they are relatively expensive, which they are. Like, Tovar's $5,700, McMahon's north of $5K, Doyle's north of $6K. So that's probably the issue, is that on a slate of this size, I can get teams that are similarly owned to the Rockies and have similar implied run totals, similar chances of success, similar upside, and just build better lineups around those teams because of the pricing. So that's probably why I'm not getting to them. If you can find lineups that you like with Colorado, though, like, your logic is perfect. Like, it makes perfect sense. Team that's relatively likely to succeed, low owned, all of that. But the salary, I think, is probably just pushing me away, where on a 12-game slate, I can just find other 3 to 5% owned teams and then have really good players around them because of salary, as opposed to the Rockies, where then I'm, punting with guys like Manny Margot. So that's probably the big difference for me. But home run pick, I will go with Is Norby in the lineup? I like Norby. I'm not playing him, like I said, but I like this park for him. I like the matchup against Barrios, so I think that's an interesting one. A left-handed Toronto bat would look pretty good too, I think. So, like, Spencer Horwitz, but hopefully neither of those happen, because I don't think I'm going to have much of either one. But I'll take either of those guys for my home run pick. Norby, if I have to just take one, I'll go with the former Orioles prospect to round things out. But thanks for checking out the show today and every day. Really appreciate that. Tune in Sunday morning at 10 a.m.-ish. I will be doing the same show for NFL. Check out Endgame Syndicate or my Dub Club, depending on which makes more sense for you. Links are in the description below. All of my NFL content lives at those 2 sites. And other than that, I will see you all back here when NBA season starts. I will continue doing the Sunday show, also doing the Monday and Thursday NFL Showdown show with Neil. But from a daily DFS standpoint, I'll be back for NBA tournament show around the same time when NBA season starts. But catch the NFL content until then. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good night. Good luck on your lineups. Enjoy your weekend.